Hi everybody, my name is Rishi Sadunandan and I'm from Tampa, Florida. This is day 1 of my 10-day course on Latin and the SAT and ACT. What many people do not realize is that there's a direct correlation between Latin and the ACT and SAT. And by learning Latin, one's score can improve significantly. I've been taking Latin for over 6 years now, and I've taken multiple ACTs and SATs. And because I learned Latin, I nearly aced the English and writing portions of both tests. Thus, I want to spread my knowledge and bring awareness to the importance of Latin worldwide. Latin is often thought of as a dead language. That is why my course is called A Dead Language Comes Alive, because I'm going to teach Latin and portray its direct correlation to standardized tests such as the SAT and ACT. Okay, so let's move on. So the goals of my course. So the goals are to understand basic Latin grammar roots, vocabulary, and translate small sentences. What this means is that when you learn the Latin, like Latin grammar, Latin roots, Latin vocabulary, it directly correlates to English grammar, English roots, and vocabulary. Because the English language, in essence, comes from the Latin language, as Latin is a base of the 5 Romance languages, which include Spanish, French, Romanian, Italian, and one more that I can't really think of right now, but it's also very important. Okay, so the next one. So understanding the connections between Latin and English roots. Like I said, English derives from Latin, so there are going to be a lot of correlation between the roots, and this could help you a lot for the vocabulary. And as you know, vocabulary is a big part of both the SAT and ACT. So the next one is to understand the format of the SAT and ACT and how it works. A lot of y'all taking this course may have never been experienced or shown to an SAT and ACT before. That is why I want to teach you all the format of these tests and how they work, as all the format will always stay the same. Well, most of the time, it will always stay the same. So you would know what the test would look like and what to expect. And by knowing what to expect, your grade itself can simply improve. So the next one, understand the difference between the two tests. So the ACT and SAT are very similar. However, there are key differences between these two tests which can really impact your score. And this is what I'll get into later on. And the last one is to improve your reading and writing skills. So by taking my 10-day course, by doing a test in the beginning and test at the end, you will see a difference because Latin does help. Believe it or not, it really has an impact. And in this course, yes, I'm not teaching you all of there is to learn about Latin, but I'm teaching you directly what you need to know to impact your reading and writing skills. Okay, perfect. Let's move on. So, what is the SAT and ACT? So the SAT and ACT are tests created by the College Board to serve as a way to measure one's math, reading, writing, and verbal skills, even if students come from different backgrounds in different schools. They're somewhat unfair as they do not include differing backgrounds and educations into account. Thus, I created this course to make sure all of you may feel a little bit more comfortable going into these tests than others and at least know what to expect. Okay, let's move on. So, the ACT versus the SAT. This is a picture I found on the internet, and it was a perfect picture to describe the difference of the two. So, at first, there are 12 questions, or 13 questions here. Some of them are a little bit outdated, but a lot of them are good. So, I'll go through them with you, and if you answer yes to the questions, just take account to which ones are you answered yes, and which ones you answered no to. And at the end, I will tell you what that means. So, let's start off. The first questions. The first question talks about locating information from reading passages without line numbers. You do not need to worry about this question because both tests now have line numbers on their reading passages. So let's go on to the second question. Are you okay with questions in random order? So SAT reading sections always flow in chronological order, while ACT do not. Thus, the last question for the reading passage of an SAT will refer to the last passage of the story, while in the ACT, the last question could even refer to the beginning of the passage. So, in essence, if you're fine with questions in random order, then either test is fine. But if it's really important for you to have questions in order for the passages and that can really impact your score, the SAT is the way to go. Let's move on. Third question. Are you good with punctuation and sentence structure? While both the ACT and SAT test grammar in their writing sections, the ACT tends to have more questions on punctuation and sentence structure, and the SAT tends to ask more questions on writing style and word/phrase choices. So, if you're good with vocabulary, I would say pick the SAT. However, if you're good with punctuation and sentence structure, like punctuation such as like where to put this period, where to put this comma, things like that, or where should should there be a separation between these two sentences, like is this an independent clause, dependent clause, things like that, I would choose the ACT. So answering yes to this question means you're choosing the ACT. Answering no means SAT. Okay, let's move on. Question 4. Do you struggle with vocabulary? In the writing and reading sections, the SAT tends to test vocabulary a little bit more than the ACT. So if you struggle with vocabulary, I would pick the ACT. But if you don't, I would pick the SAT. Let's move on a little bit. Question 5. This is the math section. Are you good with geometry and trigonometry? So if you haven't taken geometry yet, that's okay. But what I would say is if you're good with geometry and trigonometry, and many students are, I would take the ACT because it tests a lot more on geometry, trigonometry, and probability. The SAT tests more with algebra. So if you feel like you have a better base in algebra, I'll choose the SAT. But if you have a better base in geometry and trigonometry, choose the ACT. So let's move on. Question 6. Do you struggle without a calculator? While the ACT math section allows you to use a calculator for all questions, the SAT math section does not allow a calculator for all of them. Only for, I think, 20 out of the 58 total sections, 58 total questions, you're allowed to use a calculator. However, note that all questions on both the ACT and SAT math sections can be solved without a calculator. With that said, the SAT's no calculator questions require more reasoning than arithmetic skill. Meaning that the SAT allows you, they test one section with a calculator and one section without a calculator. So if you feel like you need a calculator to do well, pick the ACT. But if you feel like you can do math questions without a calculator and even go faster, choose the SAT. The ACT will ask you more questions that are a little bit more direct in math. However, the timing will be very fast. The SAT will ask you more questions, a little bit more thinking involved. Like you have to think about them. However, it's less of math skills and more of thinking and reasoning skills. And some people enjoy that better. So that's just the difference between the aspect in math in that test. So let's move on. So, are you good with science concepts? My bad. Are you good with science concepts? So the SAT does not have an official science section, even though the ACT does. The SAT still, however, tests science concepts within its reading section. So as much as like many say that if you're good at science, choose the ACT. The SAT also tests science, however, they just incorporate it within the reading. The ACT tests science completely in a whole section. So yes, if you do enjoy science, if you're very good at interpreting graphs, I would choose the ACT. And many say the science section is one where you need to know a lot of science to be good at. Well, no, that's not the case. You just need to know how to interpret graphs. That is a big thing on the ACT. How to read graphs, what it means to be in a graph. Those like what it means, this point means in the graph, like what this axis means. Like if you can read a graph well, definitely choose the ACT because that science section will be a breeze. And that takes work, but if you just practice how to read graphs and you do it a lot, you will get accustomed to it, and it will be very easy for you to go do the science section on the ACT. The SAT does not have this, but it does have a science reading passage where they have a passage in science. You just read it and you answer questions. This is not really interpreting graphs. However, it is technically a science section. So let's move on. So with that question, let me just go back really quick. Are you good with science concepts? If you pick yes, choose the ACT. If you pick no, SAT. Okay, so number 8. Do you feel comfortable offering your own opinion? So this is for the essay section. A lot of the essays nowadays are optional or not needed. I took the essay just to take it because it could show off. I felt like I was a good writer and I took it. So if you feel like you're a good writer, definitely take it. But if not, you don't need to. No colleges will require it. So, but the section can show your writing skill, how good you are at writing if you do well on it. So, the optional ACT essay gives you a passage about an issue to read and asks you to analyze different perspectives on this issue. And you're asked to give your own opinion on this issue. So, if you're more comfortable offering your own opinion, then choose the ACT. If not, choose the SAT. So, number 9. So, are you good with time management? So, time management is a big deal on both of these tests. The SAT takes 3 hours, while the ACT, without the optional essay, takes 2 hours and 55 minutes. But the SAT has only 61 questions. But the SAT has 61 questions less than the ACT. So let me rephrase that. The ACT gives you 2 hours and 55 minutes with 61 more questions than the SAT. So think about that. You're given more questions and less time for the ACT. This means that it goes by very fast. The ACT is a time management test. The questions are pretty straightforward on this test. However, they go by very, very quickly. So if you're fine with that, I was better at the ACT because even though it went by fast, the questions were very easy for me to do. The SAT are more thinking questions. You have to reason things out. However, but you're given more time with this. So if you feel like that's better for you, choose the SAT. If not, choose the ACT. So if you're good with time management, ACT. If not, SAT. Okay, so let's go on to number 10. Do you struggle really badly with any of the sections other than the essay? Basically, the ACT has more sections than the SAT. So if you do badly on one section, it won't have as much of an effect on your overall score as the SAT. So if you struggle really badly with any of the sections, choose the ACT because you're given more room to improve in the other sections since there's 4. However, if you choose the SAT and let's just say you struggle really badly with the math, there are only really 2 or 3 sections you can argue. So if you do bad on math, half of that test, that's half your whole test. But if you do bad on the math section on ACT, it's only a quarter of your whole test. So the math section is only a quarter of the test. While on the SAT, it's half of the test. Okay, let's move on. Question 11. Do you struggle without multiple choice? The SAT has 13 questions where you need to solve the answer without any multiple choice. So you cannot just guess an option. While the ACT has fully multiple choice and you could guess on every question. The problem with the ACT math is that there are 5 answer choices rather than 4 on the SAT. So it would be easier to guess on the SAT rather than the ACT. So what it comes down to is this. If you struggle without multiple choice, pick the if you struggle without the multiple choice, pick the ACT. But if you do not struggle and you're fine with answering questions without multiple choice, pick the SAT. So if you answered yes, ACT, no, SAT. The last two, these two, this depends on your financial need. I don't feel like I need to talk about this in our course. This comes down to you. But right now, I think the costs are about the same for both tests. So it should be fine. It should be fine for either of you. And if you need financial assistance, the ACT and SAT are very good about giving financial assistance for paying for these tests. So don't worry too much about the financial assistance. And then the next one is, does your state require high school students to take the ACT? You could take either test. Don't worry about that too much. Any school will accept both tests now. So don't worry about financial assistance or those 2 tests right now. So let's move on. So if you're reading this part, so basically now we finished everything. And if you answered mostly yes to all of the questions, then I think the ACT would be a better fit for you. If you answered mostly no to all of the questions, the SAT would be a better fit. So if it's half and half though, I would recommend practicing both tests and seeing which one works better for you. And that is what I have to do with these questions. I would be evened out with yes or no, and I ended up taking both tests. And I realized the ACT was the better fit for me, even though these questions I was equal. So that is just how it is. So go through these questions, ask yourself, so are you good with questions in random order? If you answer yes, ATT, no, SAT, and just go through these 12 or 13 questions. The ones that we skipped, skip those. But if you answer more yes, pick the ACT, and if you answer more no, pick the SAT. So that's just the differences between those two tests. These are the key ones. There's not really too much else. In essence, they're both very similar because they both want to test your general knowledge. And they're both standardized tests. However, they do have some key differences that can differentiate your score on these tests. So let's move on. So this is the last slide for today's presentation, and this just says, what is Latin? So Latin is an old language. It's not really spoken anymore. That's why it's called a dead language. And what I'm saying when I say dead language comes alive is Latin is a dead language. However, I'm making it come alive in quotation marks. You can think of it as I am basically just spreading its awareness now, even though it's not spoken anymore. The Latin is very important though because it's used in a lot of professions such as medicine, philosophy, law, like in theology, and so many more. You can see in like so many colleges that all of their mottos come from Latin. And almost all languages derive from Latin as well. By knowing Latin, you will have a basic understanding of several languages, and most importantly, it can help all of you with the SAT and ACT. So that's why it's very important. Thank you all for your time, and this is the first presentation of the 10-day series. I hope you all enjoyed it, and let's move on.